bend around. Okay, I need your help with this. This is not copy pasta. This is a long read, but I feel like my safety or well-being could very well depend on this. This video game, related specifically Majora's Mask, is the creepiest that has ever happened to me in my entire life. Having said that, I recently moved into my dorm room, starting as a sophomore in college, and a friend of mine gave me his old Nintendo 64 to play. I was stoked, to say the least. I could finally play one of those old games of my youth that I hadn't touched on in the last at least a decade. His Nintendo 64 came with one yellow controller and rather shoddy copy of Super Smash Bros. And while beggars can't be choosers, needless to say, it didn't take long until I became bored of beating up level 9 CPUs. The weekend I decided to drive around a few neighborhoods, and about 20 minutes or so off campus, I heading up the local garage sales, hoping to score on some good deals for ignorant parents. I ended up picking up a copy of Pokemon Stadium, GoldenEye, F-Zero, and 2 other controllers for $2. Satisfied, I began to drive out of the neighborhood when one last house caught my attention. I still had no idea why it did. There were no cars there, and only one table was set up with random junk on it, but something sort of drew me there. I usually trust my gut on these things, so I got out of the car and I was greeted by an old man. This outward appearance was, for a lack of a better word, displeasing. It was odd. If you ask me to tell you why I thought he was displeasing, I couldn't really pinpoint anything. There was just something about him that put me on edge. I can't explain it. All I can tell you is that if it wasn't in the middle of the afternoon and there were only other people with shouting distance, I would not have even thought of approaching this man. He flashed a crooked smile at me and asked what I was looking for. And immediately, I noticed that he must be blind in one of his eyes. His right eye had that glazed over look about it. I forced myself to look at his left eye instead, trying not to offend. I asked him if he had any old video games. I was already wondering how I could politely excuse myself from this situation when he would tell me he had no idea what a video game was. But to my surprise, he said he had a few ones in an old box. He assured me he'd be back in a jiffy and just turned to head back into the garage. As I watched him hobble away, I couldn't help but notice what he was selling on his table. Littered across his table were rather peculiar paintings, various artworks that looked like ink blots that a psychiatrist might show you. Curious, I looked through them. It was obvious why no one was visiting this guy's garage. These weren't actually aesthetically pleasing. As it became obvious why no one was visiting this guy's garage, as I came to the last one, for some reason, it looked almost like Majora's Mask. The same heart-shaped body with little spikes protruding outward. Initially, I just thought that since I was secretly hoping to find that game at these garages, some fruit and bull crap was projecting itself into the ink blots. But given the events that happened afterward, I'm not so sure. I should have asked the guy about it. I wish I would have asked the man about it. After staring at the Majora-shaped blot, I looked up and the old man was suddenly there again, arms length in front of me, smiling at me. I'll admit I jumped out of reflex and laughed nervously as he handed me a Nintendo 64 cartridge. It was standard gray color, except that someone had written Majora on it in black permanent marker. I got butterflies in my stomach as I realized what a coincidence this was, and asked how much he wanted it for. The old man smiled at me and told me that I could have it for free. That it used to belong to a kid who was about my age that didn't live here anymore. There was something weird about how the man phrased that, but I didn't really pay any attention to them. I was too caught up in not only finding this game, but getting it for free. I reminded myself to a bit skeptical since this looked like a pretty shady cartridge. There's no guarantee it would work, but then the optimist inside me interjected that maybe it was some kind of beta version or pirated version of the game, and that was all I needed to be back on Cloud 9. I thanked the man, and the man smiled at me and wished me well, saying goodbye then. At least that's what it sounded like to me. All the way in the booted up game, to my surprise, it worked just fine, and there was only one save file named simply as Ben. Goodbye, Ben, he was saying. Goodbye, Ben. I felt bad for the man. Obviously a grandparent, obviously going senile, and I, for some reason or another, I reminded him as his grandson, Ben. Out of curiosity, I looked at the save file. Eyeballing it, I could tell that he was pretty far in the game. He had almost all the masks and three or four remains of the bosses. I noticed that he had used an owl statue to save his game. He was on day 3 by the Stone Tower Temple with hardly any hour before the moon would crash. I remember thinking there was a shame that he had come so close to beating the game, but he never finished it. I've added a new save file, Link, out of tradition, started the game, ready to relive my childhood. For such a shady-looking game cartridge, I was impressed at how smoothly it ran. Literally just like a retail copy of the game, save for minor hiccups here and there, like textures being where they shouldn't be, random flashes of cutscenes at odd intervals, but nothing too bad. However, the only thing that was a little unnerving was that at the times NPCs would call me Link, and at the other times they would call me Ben. I figured it was just a bug. A fluke in the programming causing our files to get mixed up or something. It did kind of creep me out though. After a while, and it was around after I'd beaten the Woodfall Temple that I regrettably went into the save files and deleted Ben. I'd intended to preserve the file just out of respect in the game's original owner. It's not like I needed 2 files anyways. Hoping that would solve the problem. It did, and it didn't. Now NPCs wouldn't call me anything. Where my name should be in the dialogue, there was just a blank space. My save file name was still called Link, though. Frustrated with homework to do, I put the game down for a day. I started playing the game again last night, getting the Lens of Truth and working my way towards completing the Snowhead Temple. Now, some of you more hardcore Majora's Mask player know about the 4-day glitch. For those of you who don't, you can Google it, but the gist of it is that right as the clock is about to hit 00000 on the final day, you talk to the astronomer and look up through the telescope. If you time it the countdown disappears and you essentially have another day to finish whatever you were doing. Deciding to do the glitch and to try and finish the Snowhead Temple, I happened to get it right on the first try and the time counter on the bottom disappeared. However, when I pressed B to exit the telescope, instead of being greeted by the astronomer, I found myself in the Majora fight room at the end of the game. The trippy boxed-in arena. Staring at Skull Kid hovering above me. There was no sound, just him floating in the air above me. And the background music, which was regular for the area, but still creepy. Immediately, my palms began to sweat. This was definitely not normal. Skull Kid never appeared here. I tried moving around the area, and no matter where I went, Skull Kid would always be facing me, looking at me, just not saying anything. Nothing would happen though in this And this kept up for about 60 seconds. I thought the game had bugged or something, but I was beginning to doubt that very much. I was about to reach for the reset button when the text appeared on my screen. You're not sure why, but you apparently had a reservation. I instantly recognized that text. You get that message when you get the room key from Anju at the Stockpot Inn. But why is it playing here? I refused to entertain the notion that it was almost as if the game was trying to communicate with me. I started to navigate around the room again, testing to see if that was some sort of trigger that enabled me to interact with something here. Then I realized how stupid I was. To even think that someone would reprogram the game like this would be absurd. Sure enough, 15 seconds later, another message appeared on the screen. And again, like the first one, is already a pre-existing phrase. Go to the lair of the temple boss. Yes or no. I paused for a second, contemplating what I should press and how the game would react. When I realized that I couldn't select no. Taking a deep breath, I pressed yes, and the screen faded to white, with the new words Dawn of a New Day, the subtext beneath it, where I was ported to fill me with the most intense sense of dread and impending fear I'd ever experienced.